Hey everybody, this is Andrew Johnston, and I want to thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to, as we get started with this, and give you a little bit of background about myself, but I want to get into a little bit of the background of National Registry and how that testing system actually works. You know, a lot of people have a lot of ideas about how it works, but not maybe necessarily correct ideas. And there's a lot of rumors that are out there about it. And so I want to kind of clarify a lot of that, and it's based off of my experience from when I went to National Registry and served on one of the item writing committees and actually got the experience firsthand inside that conference room at National Registry's headquarters for what goes into the evaluation of the questions and then the kind of statistics behind it all. So we'll get into that. And then it's been such a big one that I've seen lately that people have been submitting questions about and everything is drug math, right? That never-ending feared drug math, right? So we're gonna do some practice problems for that. And then we're going to, that'll probably take us, a good bit of the next hour as we go through it. And then we will circle around, kind of close up for the day and hopefully kind of get into a direction of where to go from here for the next stuff. But my background is as a program director and executive director of an EMS school in Arizona. I've actually been in EMS education full-time for 8 years. In 2012, I started teaching the EMT program full-time. And then by the end of the year, I started teaching the paramedic program and then was program director at the same end of that year. And then I've been doing it full-time ever since. So teaching and then running the entire school, all the business operations and everything. I go back a couple of years even earlier than that. So I'm actually in my 10th year being involved in EMS education. And it goes back to 2010 is when I got my paramedic certification. And the school that I got it from, they needed some help with National Registry skills testing. So I got involved helping proctor National Registry skills. And then I got my CPR instructor certification. Then they let me substitute teach a class for a little while. And then it just kind of kept going and going and going from there. So that's a little bit of how I got into it. And it wasn't the goal right from the start. My goal, when I started paramedic school, I was thinking about the fire department. That's what I wanted to do. And the more I got into paramedicine, the more I just fell in love with the medical side of everything. And so I had that idea that, you know what, I really like this stuff. I'm going to go to medical school. That's what I actually decided I wanted to do in paramedic school. So I was working for a private ambulance company at the time and was doing that throughout paramedic school. And then for the next couple of years afterwards, as I started, part-time helping out at the school, I already had my undergraduate degree in psychology. And so I started going back, doing some more chemistry and biology and those types of classes so that I could apply to med school. And that's when it timed up when I was getting more and more and more involved in the education side. And I just absolutely fell in love with it and been doing it ever since. So it derailed those plans for medical school. And I think I'm thankful about that because I get the opportunity to continue working and training EMTs and paramedics every day. That's why I do this actually. Whether it's a short hyper-accelerated EMT class or a year-long paramedic program, I just love seeing the progression of students' knowledge and everything. And like I said, I've just fell in love with it. Nobody in my family was EMS or healthcare or anything like that when I was growing up. So I had no background experience with any of this stuff. It was all, classes, and it's, my classes are what a lot of your classes look like. And I've heard it all and seen it all with good instructors and bad instructors. And I was just committed to never being an instructor that I considered, a bad instructor when I was in school, or the instructor that was just reading slides at me for 8 hours a day. I just hated that. So I was just committed to just constantly getting better and growing as an instructor and being able to better provide an education that actually helps the students, right? And not kind of rigidly adhering to a one-size-fits-all education model for students. Everybody in the classes are different, and so every class is different. You got to treat them differently, right? And treat them the same in terms of respect and some basic principles like that, but some students are textbook learners. Some students are hands-on learners. Some students are visual. Some students are auditory. So you got to make sure that you're providing a program that matches all those different learning styles. So that's what kind of committed me and got me into this. And I've been doing it for a while here in Arizona. That's where I'm at, the Phoenix area. And I decided that I think I can help more people, right? I don't care if students went to my school or didn't go to my school. There's students out there that are needing help, and I have a passion for this, and I'm going to do it, right? So that's why I started this thing and created this system just to help you out. That's legitimately, honestly, at the end of it, I just want to help you out, right? I adamantly believe that everybody can be successful in this stuff, and I don't want anybody spending money that they don't need to be spending on this, right? You've already paid enough for your programs. You already paid enough for textbooks. You're driving all over the place for clinical shifts and all that. I get it, right? So you don't need to spend any more. Let me just figure out how to help you. So we get people, I've been interacting and talking with people here that are on their 5th attempt, right, of national registry. They're struggling, they're trying to pass, right? And those are the people that I want to help out immediately, right? Because you've been spending, was it $125, $120 each time you take national registry now? 120, 120, 120, right? It just adds up so much. We got to save your money. So I'm on a 1 attempt plan here for you guys. I want to help you review and cover the material and make sure that 1 attempt is all you need, right? 1 more attempt if you've already taken it before. If you're prepping up for your 1st attempt, 1 attempt. That's my goal. That's what your goal should be as well. That's what we're going to run with. So getting into it, I wanted to cover a little bit, like I said, about national registry stuff before we do a little bit of some drug math review. So the first part is just understanding what you're walking into. So again, whether it's your 1st attempt or attempt number 5, it doesn't matter, right? You got to know what you walk into. And like I said, I want to dispel some of the rumors that are out there. So at a minimum, every single person's going to get 80 questions. Right? Maximum is 150, right? And you hear people out there, they're like, oh, I got cut off at 75. No, they didn't. 75 might have been the last number that they saw on the screen, but that's not what they got cut off on. They got to at least get 80, right? And you're not getting more than 150, which is the other end of it. Now, the way that actually breaks down is 60 to 130 of those are considered live questions. That's what you're actually evaluated against. And you get 20 pilot questions. So pilot questions are questions that are submitted into the test bank by these item writing committees, these test writing committees. They say, hey, we got these questions. We think they're pretty good questions. Let's get some statistics. Right? So just like everything in medicine for us, it's based off of evidence-based practice, right? There's research studies that prove these things work well for patients, right? They do the same thing here with exams and statistics behind the exams, right? They have all of that data behind it, but in order to collect that data, they got to pilot it out with some of these questions. So they have 20 questions that it doesn't matter if you get right or wrong. It doesn't count for you. It doesn't count against you. It doesn't impact your evaluation on National Registry on that test day whatsoever. All they're doing is getting more questions in the bank and getting some data, getting some results for how students, how candidates answer those questions to be able to decide, is it a good question? Let's put it in the test bank officially as a evaluating ability question, or let's kick it back to a committee, maybe restructure it, or maybe just toss it out entirely, right? So they are looking for questions that are good questions statistically, and they have a model for what that means by the data. But if they have a question that 100% of students get correct, that's not a good test question, right? It's not saying that it's actually validly really evaluating people's knowledge. It's too easy, right? So it's not good. If nobody ever gets that question wrong, do we have any sort of real idea if that person knows enough, if that person knows enough? Not really. Same thing on the flip side though. If 100% of students or candidates got that question wrong, that's also not validly helping out our ability to determine if these people are entry-level competent, right? That's the entry-level competent. That's what we're evaluating against. So we're not, the questions, I'm not part of National Registry. The questions, if it's too easy, it's out. If it's too hard, it's out, right? They want to see questions that are statistically helpful, that actually have a purpose, that have a meaning, that says, hey, at least some people chose all the answers, which means the people that are choosing this answer actually really know it, because there's valid amounts of people that are choosing the incorrect answers, right? So it's a very interesting kind of statistics behind that, but those are those pilot questions, right? They're trying to just build some data behind it to determine if it's a valid exam question, right? The flip side of it is you have 2.5 hours to take the test. So 2.5 hours, 150 minutes for a max of 150 questions. So you're really looking at it as the potential for a minute per question. I will talk a little bit about that for how it actually comes into play. But if you have a minute per question, there will be questions that will take you 8 seconds, right? Where you read the question, read the answers, like that's the answer, moving on, right? You're just that confident in your knowledge and your ability. And so you move very quickly through some, which frees up a little bit of a buffer, frees up a little bit of extra time for you to really read the more in-depth questions and answers, and to read it again, and to read it again, maybe read it again, right? Now you need more time on some of those questions. So it's a little bit of a give and take, right? Some questions very quick, knock them out. Other questions take a little bit longer, right? But a maximum of 2.5 hours is allowed. There's no minimum time frame that you have to take. So you could just cook and book your way through a bunch of test questions and be done in 30 minutes. It's possible, right? But again, the statement is, and this is all published stuff on National Registry's website, it's designed to build statistical confidence on the ability to provide safe and effective entry-level emergency medical care, right? So that's the goal, right? That's most of the published goals of programs on the national accreditation stuff, is entry-level competence, right? You know, we obviously like to train you better. Hopefully we do train you better as a school, but the goal, what registry evaluates you against, is what gets deemed entry-level competency, right? So those are some of the numbers. So in 80 to 150 is it, right? You can't get less, right? There's so many people, I see them all the time, like, oh yeah, I got 70 questions on my paramedic test. Plus at least 10 more, right? You got to get 80, right? I don't know why, like, it's possible, like I said, it's just the last number that people saw on there, and that's cool, right? Power to you. But everybody gets at least 80, max 150. 60 to 130 of those are live questions that you're actually evaluated against. And the way it works is the computer algorithms that take a look at it. Once you reach 60 questions, the computer is really good at knowing whether or not you know enough or don't know enough. Right? Whether or not you have the competence level or you don't have the competence level. After 60 questions, right, it knows that pretty well. The only reason why the computer goes for more questions and more questions and more questions is to just build that statistical confidence, right? Is to put the validity of the data, the math behind it to support that, right? So the way it could work, you know, kind of an exaggerated example of that is all these questions have different difficulty level rating scales. And if a question is deemed difficult and you're getting it right, and a question that's deemed on the easier side and you're getting it wrong, it's kind of confusing the system a little bit, right? In terms of figuring out, does this person know enough, right? Do they know enough? Are they competent against the criteria that they have established? You're getting the hard questions right, but you're getting the easy questions wrong. And so it's kind of, it's confusing to the system. It's just so the system's like, so do they know enough or not, right? They shouldn't be getting the easy ones right, but they're getting those wrong, but then they're getting the hard ones right. So let me just ask more questions, right? So that computer just keeps asking more questions to hone in, to focus, and to decide that, yep, statistically you know enough, you're above our criteria threshold, and it shuts you off on whatever random question that is. Or the flip side is you're not knowing enough, so you can't, you're not competent enough, you fell just below the threshold. As soon as you statistically fall below that threshold, then it shuts off, right? Whatever random question that is. But you at least got to get 60 evaluated live questions, but you always get the extra 20 pilot questions as well. So it's a very interesting process. The other part And this table is on National Registry's website too. It's the 5 different categories that you get evaluated against, and how much of the exam is composed of questions in that category, and how much of those questions are adult versus pediatric questions. So on the airway, respiration, and ventilation category, 18 to 22% of your overall exam questions that you receive, 18 to 22% of those will be airway, respiration, or ventilatory categorized questions. Of all those questions, 85% of them are adult, 15% of them are pediatrics. Okay. Cardiology resuscitation, you can see, is 22 to 26% of your test. 85 adult, 15% pediatric. Trauma, 13 to 17. Medical OB-GYN, 25 to 29%. Again, the same 85-15 split for adult pediatrics. And then EMS operations is 10 to 14%. And on the operation side, they don't really differentiate. There's not a lot of variability between adult EMS operations and pediatric EMS operations. So they don't define those questions that way. So that's the categories and the percentages. And everybody that takes National Registry for paramedic has 18 to 22% of their exam is airway respirations, cardiology 22, 26, everybody falls in that. Now, some people can fall in the higher end of one of those categories and the lower end on some of the other categories. Then another person can be high on those categories and low on those categories, but they're at least all within those ranges, right? And all of those ranges, 85% of them are adult and 15% are pediatrics. Really, I feel so confident and strong about the people when they fail National Registry. Half the battle, I think, they just get twisted up in their head, right? They start playing mind games about what's it mean that I got this question and I don't understand it. I got this question and it's similar to this other question. So since they're asking me this question, does that mean I answered that question wrong? So I got to answer this one differently, right? And people start playing these weird mind games with themselves about what does this mean, right? It's telling me something. No, it's not. And it's not telling you anything. It's just take each question individually, one at a time, right? All it means is if you've taken a test and in the middle of your National Registry test, you've answered 10% of your questions were EMS operations, 25% of your questions were medical, 13% were trauma, 22% were cardiology, but only 10% was airway, right? That was the category that you were furthest away from. And guess what category your next question is going to be? It's going to be airway, right? So the next question you get, the only thing it means is you were furthest away from that category for your overall percentages of your exams. It has nothing to do with whether you answered anything right or wrong beforehand. It's just, in this situation, you were furthest away from the airway category, so we have to give you another airway category because we got to get it up to 18%. Right? That's it. Right? And it's wild when I was sitting there listening to them explain this to me at National Registry, I'm like, that's awesome, right? Because that's something that's super easy to communicate and relay, that's the next question, is that category, right? And it means nothing based off of that prior history of that test. It's just that's the next category because you're furthest away from that category, right? If it's adult or pediatric, just means you're further away from the 85% of adult or the 15% of pediatric. That's going to be it, right? So that's how the computer decides what type of question, what category of question needs to come next and doesn't need to be adult or pediatric, just because it has to get everybody's test to fit into these percentage breakdowns. So it's phenomenally interesting going into that. But even more interesting was on the very last day, I think we did 3 days, 2.5 days of just hours after hours after hours of reviewing questions and changing them. And they have a structure that they use for the tests and everything. So it makes a lot of sense sometimes, depending on your perspective, I guess. But it was myself and other program directors and other medical directors that were there. And we wrote questions and we submitted them and then we blew them up on the big screen in the room. And we all just sit there and talk to it. It was like, hey, is there only one valid answer? Right? Is there any confusion? Are 2 answers technically correct? We got to change one of those questions. And so it was just beating up question after question and answer after answer to make sure that everybody in that room on those days was in agreement that that is a valid question, and each of those answers are answers, but there's only one definitively correct answer, right? And that's a lot of time people are like, but there's 4 correct answers, or there's 2 correct answers. Yes, but, right? Yes, but, right? There's either not 2 definitively correct answers, or if there are, then it becomes a sequencing thing where you got to say which one is first, right? So that's some of the test taking stuff that we'll really get into as we keep doing these sessions, is understanding like, hey, all 4 of these answers are things that I'm going to do for this patient that they described to me. I guarantee I'm going to do that one, I'm going to do that one, I'm going to do that one, and I'm going to do that one. Right? So then the question becomes, which one are you going to do first, right? So if it says you should add in your mind, you should do what first, right? And you got to pick which one is first, right? That's a big, big, big thing, is sequencing matters, right? Sequencing matters so much, right? BLS before ALS, right? You can't tube them before you assess their respirations, right? So BLS before ALS comes into play for us so much in this stuff. So I wrote this question. This is not a question that I submitted to them. It's not a registry question. It's just one that I typed up just to highlight a point here that I want to make. Right? I'm not in the business of giving questions that I heard people say on National Registry, or questions that I submitted to National Registry. Like, that's not it. That's not why I'm here. Right? I'm here to help. I'm here to clarify and I'm here to help work on critical thinking and test taking strategies and confidence internally, so that you know you can go and knock out these tests no matter what attempt you're on. But that's why I'm here. So I got tips and tricks and hints and helpful stuff for you, but I'm not giving you a shortcut, right? I'm not giving you answers. I don't have the answers. I don't have the questions. Somebody has questions, right? But the point in putting this question about this, let's just read it and talk about it for a second. So it says, your patient experienced blunt trauma to the chest and is coughing up blood. You should A, insert an oropharyngeal airway adjunct, B, suction for no longer than 15 seconds, C, implement spinal motion restrictions, or D, assist ventilations with a bag valve mask device. Now the reality is, in my opinion, there's not quite enough information here to answer it, but that's besides the point of this question. What I want to think about, or what I want you to think about for a second, is exactly what I did on that last day at National Registry, which was categorize the questions. Okay? And so you got to think, is this question airway respiration and ventilation topic question? Is it a cardiology and resuscitation question? Is it a trauma question? Is it a medical OB gynecology question? Probably not. Is it an EMS operations question? Okay? And so if you thought about it and you had to pick one category, which category would you pick? Which one would you actually say? Now, what my guess has happened every time I've done this and talked to people about it, what typically happens is half the people say, this is a trauma question, easy, why are we even talking about this? This is trauma. And the other half of the people are like, this is an airway question, right? It's asking us, how are we going to manage the airway? And I think we should suction this patient. I think this is an airway management question. And the trauma people are like, dude, it's in the question. It says blunt trauma to the chest. It's a trauma question. And then the airway people are like, is coughing up blood, you should do what for the airway based off the answer? This is an airway question, right? And so what we actually did when we were there, we got this question, we had a little clicker, and everybody in the room had their own clicker. And if I thought it was a trauma question, I could say, okay, I would press the trauma question button. And the person sitting next to me, they'd be like, airway management, right? And we would bring it up in the group and say, hey, 60% of you said trauma, 40% of you said airway. You guys want to talk about it? See if you can come up with a consensus. So trauma people would make their sales pitch, the airway people would make their sales pitch, and then we'd vote again, right? And we'd re-vote, and we'd say, hey, now 80% of you said trauma, 20% of you still said airway. 80 is bigger than 20, it's a trauma question. And they'd key it as trauma, and we move on to the next question. Okay? And so it blew my mind when I heard this, because for years I've been telling students, yeah, just listening to people, like a lot of people got 2 categories emphasized more than others. Well, we can go back I mean, so you might give 2 categories on the higher end of the percentages compared to the lower end of the percentages, or EMS operations is only 10 to 14. That's much lower than, 25 to 29. So yeah, you kind of get some of them emphasized a little bit more than others, but not by much, really, right? But the wild part is you could get a lot of trauma questions, and a third of those trauma questions might actually be keyed as airway, respiration, and ventilation questions. And another third of those trauma questions might actually be keyed as a cardiology and resuscitation question. And a third of those trauma questions are actually keyed as trauma questions. So you see, man, I got a bunch of trauma, right? But some of those weren't actually keyed as trauma questions. It might have been a trauma scenario, but it wasn't keyed as a trauma question. So it was a very, very interesting thing actually going through that, of saying, oh, like, that's why some people say they got a ton of cardiac questions. Well, one of those cardiac questions might have been an infection of the heart, and somebody said that's a medical question. Or it's a cardiac question that resulted in fluid backup in the lungs, and we're treating the pulmonary edema with intubation. That's an airway question, right? And you just see cardiac, so your mind starts processing that. The whole reason why I even bring this up is purely just for us to think about, what are we going to do about this information? And all that tells me, and all that should tell you, is to just take each question for what it is, right? Each question is its own island of a question, and try to disregard what number question you're on, try to disregard the prior questions that you got. It doesn't mean anything. That's not why you're getting this question phrased this way, right? All you got to do is just focus on that one question that you have in front of you, right? The next question doesn't matter based off of this question, which didn't matter based off the question before it. Right? So slow down, right? Slow down goes so far for you. I really can't encourage you to take, some slow, deep breaths in, hold it for a second, and then a nice relax, right? Do that a couple times before you go into the test, a couple times during the test. If you start to feel like your mind's spinning, going into some sort of weird meta level of what these things mean in National Registry, it means nothing, right? Just one question at a time. And I know that's easy for me to say on this side now, and it's hard on your side, thinking about testing it for the first time or testing again with National Registry. I get it. And my anxiety nerves were through the roof. Right? When I went to schedule my test, there was a testing slot that was available the next morning, the next day, or nothing for about a month. And I was like, I can't wait a month. I'm going to drive myself crazy. So I'm taking it tomorrow. So I scheduled it, took it the next morning. I got to the testing center about an hour beforehand, just trying to eliminate extra stressors, right? I'm not going to get stuck in traffic worrying about getting there. So I got there like an hour early. It was insane. And I sat there in my car, and I was frantically like flipping through the textbook like I was going to learn something there at the end. Like, it's just ridiculous. You're not learning anything at that point, trust me. So I was sitting there for like an hour just flipping through the textbook. And when I got close to the time, I was like, all right, let's do this. And I turned the car off, got out of the car, went blah, and just threw up in the parking lot at the testing center. It was just a complete stress, anxiety overload. It was embarrassing. I was looking around and like, man, did anybody see me before I'm about to go take my test? I threw up in the parking lot right beside of the car. Nobody was there, thankfully. Went inside, took my test, and then left the test. And I was like, well, I don't feel good about that. I don't. I consider myself a very good textbook learner, and medicine and anatomy and physiology and all that stuff always made a lot of sense to me. I consider myself a very strong textbook person. And I left that test saying, nope, I don't feel good about that. And I know a lot of you know that feeling. Even if it's from your EMT test, a lot of you are like, I don't feel good about that test, right? On EMT, I felt pretty good when I left. Paramedic, I was like, I don't know about that. Don't know about that at all. So I took the test, and then that's what that experience will look like. So I know the anxiety, I know the stress, I know that. You just got to find some calming techniques, some slow, deep breaths, and to slow yourself down, right? The test is not trying to trick you. right? Some people are like, oh, registry is just out to trick us, and they're trying to give us 2 correct answers. They're trying to trick you. Registry didn't do this, right? I did. Your program director did. Your medical director did. That's the people that go to National Registry, write the questions that go in the test bank. Registry didn't do this. We did. The educators, right? And hopefully your program director is not trying to trick you. Your medical director is not trying to trick you. I know, speaking for myself at my school, I'm not trying to trick my students, right? That doesn't benefit anybody. Right? Everybody's in this weird competitive game of tracking everybody's, National Registry pass rates against each other. Like, oh, here's my pass rates. What's their pass rates like? Hey, my school got this pass rates. What that school's pass rates like? Everybody's kind of looking at that. They might say they're not. They're probably lying. I'm just kidding. No, they might. But like, we're not trying to trick you, right? Again, the goal for National Registry is we want to evaluate competency of entry-level emergency medical care. Right? I'm not trying to trick you. This is just the testing system that we all agreed upon for it. So good, bad, or otherwise, it's what we got, but we're not trying to trick you. We're trying to make sure that you know what you need to know. And so much of it, in my opinion, so much of all the test questions is, here's a bunch of information. What's your differential diagnosis? Right? What's that field impression, working diagnosis, whatever you want to call it? What do you think's going on with your patient? Right? And that becomes a lot of what we're actually going to get into in these sessions. What I think will help you guys the most is the pattern recognition of, when I see these signs and symptoms and vitals, it tells me meningitis. When I see these signs and symptoms and vitals, it tells me cardiac tamponade, right? Once you get good at just that pattern recognition, you're halfway home, man. You can do so well just with that strategy alone. So we'll do a lot of pattern recognition of that type of stuff, because that's a lot of questions out there, is what is going on with your patient. Okay? A lot of the other questions is, here's a bunch of information. What are you going to do? How are you going to treat your patient? Right? And that's a big one. How are you going to treat your patient? Right? So you got to figure out, what are you going to do for your patient? What's going on with your patient? Those are two very closely tied together. And I'm sure there's plenty of definitional questions, plenty of drug math questions, all that type of stuff too. But a lot of it, I mean, at the end of the day, for us to say you've got entry-level competence to be a paramedic, you have to be able to recognize what's going on with your patient, and you have to know how to treat them. There's just no other way about it. You got to be able to recognize what's going on. You have to know how to treat them. So one of the big ones, like I said today, that I wanted to jump in right away with, is to give you that resource of some drug math, right? Being able to show you how I structure it, right? There's other little ways of doing it. People have little shortcuts and stuff like that. I like setting it up mathematically because it protects you the most. And if you just get good at setting it up, that structure that way, you'll get the correct answer every single time, right? Some of the shortcuts can mess you up if they screw some variables on you, if they twist them around and give you a different concentration than normal, or if they say macro drip instead of micro drip tubing. So some of those things can mess you up. If you're good with drug math and you have a structure that works for you and you keep getting the right answer, then don't change it, right? That's math for you. Once you have a system that works for you and you get the right answer, don't change it. Now, if you have a system that you keep using and you're getting it right only sometimes, you should probably change it, right? So this is how I'm going to do it, and I'll show you what it actually looks like. So we get a little paint app here up. We'll jump right into it for this last little bit. Future sessions, I'm not going to go through all the registry background stuff unless people have questions that can come up when we do some Q&A. But the hour I've actually found kind of doing it today goes pretty quickly. So I might do a little bit longer sessions in the future. I'll do them at least once a week, but probably more often than that even. So I want to really kind of highlight some of that stuff for you. So there's 3 different drug math type problems that I feel like you're more than likely to see. One of them is, how are you going to do fluid bolusing? A little bit bigger here. Good. Are you going to do a fluid bolus? Which a lot of us would probably say, yeah, give them a little bit of fluid, you reassess. Give them a little bit of fluid, reassess. That's kind of that real world practical application. But they'll phrase some questions in terms of fluid bolus, kind of goofy on us honestly for how we actually operate. So fluid bolus, a medication bolus. So just drawing a medication out of a vial and say, that's how much we're going to give, right? And then the big one is a medication, medication infusion, like a dopamine calculation, right? So actually factoring in, we're going to continually give this over time. That's going to be the more common one that you probably see, you know, at least I know on my final exams and stuff like that, I put that type of question more so than the other ones. So fluid bolus, they may phrase it something, or a type of question that you might see is you're ordered to give, we'll say normal saline. Let's do 800 milliliters over 5 hours, right? 5 hours. Again, it's kind of a goofy way to say it, where we don't always think about it that way, but that's a good kind of scripted question to give you. So you're ordered to give normal saline 800 milliliters over 5 hours, and you have micro drip tubing, right? Micro drip tubing, right? So we're going to give 800 milliliters of fluid over 5 hours, and we're using our micro drip tubing, which is our 60 drop per milliliter tubing, right? 60 drop per milliliter. Okay. So the way I set up these fluid bolus ones is the dose, which is a little bit strange to think about, but the dose in this case is we're ordered to give 800 milliliters over 5 hours. So that's our dose. It's dose times tubing, right? Because most of these questions are going to ask you, what's your drip rate? How many drops per minute are you giving? So we can figure that out, right? So if we're trying to get drops per minute, right, and do our dose, which is 800 milliliters over 5 hours, right? That's how we're going to say it, right? 800 milliliters over 5 hours, right? Or in 5 hours, we're going to give 800 milliliters. Let's set it up this way. The issue is we're going to ask for drops per minute, right? Right? Drops per minute. And you see that GTT, if you don't remember that from school, it's Latin gute, I think is how you say it. It's Latin for drops or drips, right? So drops per minute is what we have to calculate out. So if we have 800 milliliters over 5 hours, right, then we've got to get that into minutes, right? We got to go hours to minutes, right? So 5 hours, 60 minutes per hour is 300 minutes, right? So the dose that we're going to use is 800 milliliters over 300 minutes. It's because my answer is drops per minute, right? So I got to get it into minutes, right? So 800 milliliters over 300 minutes is our dose times our tubing, which is 60 drops per milliliter, right? Remember, a lot of time we just fall in that habit of saying 60 drop tubing, right? Remember, that's 60 drops per milliliter. So every time you're watching through that little drip chamber, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 48, 49, 58, 59, 60, right? 60 drops go through. That means 1 milliliter of fluid went into that patient, right? So when you set this up, and this, if you did a chemistry background or anything like that, you did this dimensional analysis this way, fancy words, if you're looking at this and you're like, multiplying fractions, no, I don't do that anymore. I did that in 2nd grade and I've never done it since. So when you set it up this way, what happens if you have the same units on top that you do on bottom, they cancel each other out, they go away. So we've got milliliters on top, milliliters on bottom, those go away. And all we're left with is drops per minute, which is what the question is actually asking us. So that's good. So this, when you do it, you multiply across the top, multiply across the bottom. So 800 times 60, and 800 times 60, your calculator, 48,000, okay? And then 300 times 1 is 300. So 48,000 divided by 300 is 160 drops per minute. That's it. So that's how you would actually calculate that out. I do it. I set it up that way every single time. Dose times tubing, or your fluid bolusing, your fluid administration. If they phrase a question at you like that with, you're ordered to give fluid, 800 milliliters of fluid over 5 hours, and you're using micro drip tubing, what is your drip rate? Right? How many drops per minute? are you required to give it. So you do it this way, and that's how that works out. Side note, I used to make my students do that longhand, right, long division out to actually calculate that. And a couple of, I think it was 2 years ago, National Registry said that they have the little calculator widget thing that you can pop up on your computer screen at the testing center. So you're allowed to use a calculator on those tests now. So I encourage you now, just plug the numbers into your calculator and you're good to go. Right? But you got to know the structure, right? You got to know how to set it up. So that is our fluid bolus. Now, if we're doing a medication bolus, right, the answer is how much fluid are you going to draw into your syringe, right? So how many milliliters of fluid to give a certain medication, right? So this question is usually asking, how many milliliters, right? How many milliliters? So the equation that I'm going to set it up is going to be the dose that I want to give my patient times the concentration, right? How it's actually packaged. How many milligrams per milliliter are in my medication vial, for example. So if I have a medication and I'm going to give, I'm ordered to give, I'll use some easy math on this one. I'm ordered to give 20 milligrams of Lasix, for example, and my vial has, let's say, 100 milligrams and 20 milliliters of fluid. Right? You can figure out how much fluid, what volume of fluid, what's the amount of fluid that you're going to give, right? So I've got my dose and I've got how it's packaged, right? So my concentration. So I'm going to do dose, 20 milligrams, times my concentration. And thinking back to that last problem, remember how we had milliliters on top, cancel out milliliters on bottom, right? My answer I need to get in this one is milliliters. So I got to make sure that milliliters are the only thing that's left over, right? So I've got 20 milliliters contains 100 milligrams. And as a concentration, we can phrase it either way. We can say there's 100 milligrams and 20 milliliters of fluid. Or we can say 20 milliliters of fluid contains 100 milligrams, right? So now we're going to multiply across the top and multiply across the bottom, right? We wanted to visually see that as a fraction, just put it over 1. So 20 times 20 is 400. 100 times 1 is 100. 400 over 100 equals 4 milliliters of fluid, because milligrams and milligrams cancel out. So all I'm left with is milliliters, right? Sometimes the math, the problems that are very easy, where, you know, if you have adenosine and it's 6 milligrams and 2 milliliters, and your dose is 6 milligrams, then it's easy. You obviously draw out all 2 milliliters, but they'll usually tweak it up a little bit to make sure that you can actually figure it out. So a lot of people, not everybody, a lot of people can look at it and say it's 20 milligrams. I have 100 milligrams in my vial. So that's 1/5. So I need 1/5 of my 20 milliliters. That's 4 milliliters. There's my answer. Boom, I'm good. Right? If you have any hesitancy or any doubt whatsoever, I encourage you, set it up, right? Take the couple extra seconds, set it up, double check yourself and make sure. Double check yourself and make sure. All right, so that's your medication bolus. And then the last one combines the two, right? So fluid bolus is we're going to give fluid over time, drops per minute. Medication bolus is we're just going to give this amount of fluid. Right? Now the medication infusion is we're going to give this amount of medication continually over time. So we got to factor in all three of our variables. Right? So it's going to be dose times concentration, how it's packaged, times our tubing. Right? And that's going to equal our drops per minute, right? Counting those little drops through that drip chamber. So best one for this, let's go ahead and say we're ordered to give dopamine, and let's just say 8 micrograms per kilogram per minute. So that's 8 micrograms of the medication per kilogram of body weight per minute. Right? So we're giving it based off of how much our patient weighs. Right? So you got to know that. So let's just say our patient weighs 90 kilograms, right? Sometimes they'll give it to you in pounds, and you got to make sure that you can figure that out. So remember, to get kilograms, do pounds divided by 2.2 is our weight in kilograms. Right? So just double check that. If they give you pounds, remember you got to convert it to kilos, right? In this case, let's just go ahead and say it's 90 kilos, right? If it gave you in pounds, start there, convert your pounds to kilos is step number 1. All right. Let's say we have our concentration is 400 milligrams and 250 milliliters. 400 milligrams and 250 milliliters is pretty standard concentration dopamine. And let's say we're going to use our same micro drip tubing, our 60 drop per milliliter tubing. So that's what we're going to do. And this is going to be how we set it up. So step number 1 is figure out our dose. So we've got 8 micrograms for every 1 kilogram the patient weighs every minute. So the first thing we have to do is multiply by our patient weight. So if we're going to give 8 micrograms for every 1 kilogram, right? 8 micrograms for every 1 kilogram, we've got 90 kilograms. So 8 times 90 is 720 micrograms per minute. Right? 720 micrograms per minute. Right? Concentration is 400 milligrams and 250 milliliters. And just like the previous ones, what we're going to run into is our dose is in micrograms. Our concentration is in milligrams. Right? So remember, 1 milligram is 1,000 micrograms. Right? I'm not even going to bother simplifying some of this since you guys can just plug it into your calculator. Right? So 1 milligram is 1,000 micrograms. So if I have 400 milligrams, that would be 400,000 micrograms. Right? So if I asked you guys and said, hey, which variable is on bottom, it needs to be the micrograms so that we have micrograms on top and bottom, so those will cancel each other out. So we're going to set up our concentration. We're going to put milliliters on top. And we said that's 400,000 micrograms, right? 400 milligrams is 400,000 micrograms. Right? So dose times concentration is what we've got. And now times tubing. Right? Times tubing is 60 drops per milliliter. Now what we can do is micrograms on top and micrograms on bottom go away. Milliliters on top and milliliters on bottom go away. And so all you're left with is drops per minute, which is what we need. And now we're going to do our math. So we're going to multiply 720 times 250 times 60. It's going to be a big number. Right? So 720 times 250 times 60. It's 10,800,000. Right? Nice, right? Just leave it plugged into your calculator. Don't change anything. Right? So 10,800,000. 1 times 400,000 times 1 is just 400,000. Sorry. So 400,000. So leave your 10,800,000, divide by 400,000, and it gets us 27 drops per minute. Sometimes the numbers get crazy like that, and it is more helpful to simplify them down or to convert the concentration to a microgram per 1 milliliter concentration. You can do that too. Just the more you manipulate some of the numbers, the more potential errors you might make. So I kind of caution you a little bit with that. And especially, like I said, nowadays, being able to just leave these numbers in the calculator so you don't have to get lost and drop a 0 on your 10 million, like in this one. You just leave the numbers as they are and plug them in. You can do that and it'll get it. If your answer comes out with a decimal, like if it said 27.3 drops per minute, remember we can't count 0.3 of a drop going through that little drip chamber. So we got to go to some old school math and say if it's 0.5 or higher, round up to the next whole number, 0.4 and lower, round down. So if it's at 27.3, we would round that down and choose 27 drops a minute. If it was 27.7 drops a minute, we'd round that up to 28 drops a minute, just in case the answers that you have to choose from would be something like 25, 26, 27, or 28 drops a minute, right? If it's very, very precise like that, then you really got to make sure that you're doing your math safely and properly so that you get a very precise answer. And if it's not automatically a whole number like this one was with 27 drops a minute, if it came out to, again, like 27.8 drops a minute, remember 0.5 and higher, round up to that next whole number, 0.4 and lower, round down to that next whole number. So hopefully that was helpful. I know there's a lot there on that screen. What I'll do for you guys though is upload some more practice questions like that to give yourself more of an opportunity. And then I'll upload this video, which is recorded. So you can do some practice problems, rewatch the video, do some practice problems, rewatch the video, right? Until you're just rocking and rolling and knocking them out every single time. Like I said, all the methods mathematically work out the same way. This is just how I structure it. Visually, it makes a lot of sense for me. It's very linear. I can follow it very easily. When I do dose times tubing or dose times concentration or dose times concentration times tubing for the infusions, that's how I set it up. Some people use terminology like desired dose divided by dose on hand and that type of stuff. It's just different visual ways of laying out the math. But ultimately, it's still mathematically working out this way. This is probably just this is the most textbook mathematical way of structuring the dimensional analysis to really work through getting ourselves down to drops per minute or milliliters or whatever the answer or whatever the question is asking us. So I like doing this. I feel like it's just such a common type of question that you'll see. Is some sort of medication bolus, medication infusion calculation. So I definitely make sure, or I would make sure if I were you, that you can do it and can do it successfully and consistently. So if you get a test question like that, you don't go, oh, no, not the math question. I was hoping I wouldn't get one, right? Assume you're going to get it so that you see it and you're like, I got this. This is easy, and it's a confidence building question during the course of the exam, right? That's so much of a beneficial thing for us, is to have a confidence boosting question so that when you get the other questions that you're not super sure about, right, you have a little bit more confidence in you from some of those past ones, right? Like if you get a GCS table, like a GCS calculation, right, just memorize the GCS table, right? So that if you get a GCS question, it's a confidence boosting question because you got it memorized and it's very black and white, right? Or if you get a drug math question, it's a confidence boosting question, right? The more of those types of questions you can get that help you and motivate you and inspire you and boost that confidence during the course of the program, it goes so long through that mentality over the course of the test. So that's a little bit today. Future sessions, like I said, I won't do all that national registry stuff at the start. Unless it comes up in Q&A, but mostly we're going to just dive right into a variety of different topics. We'll do some ACLS stuff, some PAL stuff, some trauma and PHTLS stuff. I'll do some drug box review, right? I've got a whole drug box here at my house, so we can pull out some medication vials and talk through all of that. But mostly I just want to work with you guys over the course of this for as long as you need it to feel confident and ready to go so that you can knock out your national registry test. Because that was what matters to me. You spent enough time and enough money on your program, your textbooks, you're driving around to your clinical rotations, all of that type of stuff. I don't want you to have to spend more money than you need to. So utilize this. Shoot me a message, email me, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you want, and let me know what you're struggling with, and I'll get to work, right? I'll get to work on helping you out as much as possible. So thank you very much. I'm right at an hour on this one. So thank you. And I will see you at least next week, right? Keep an eye out. I'll post some more dates and some more times. I might do them more than once a week just because I enjoy it and it's helpful for you guys. And that's what matters most. So thank you again. And I will see you next time.